Welcome to our first Plugged into EA podcast of 2024. Our two interviewers are Jamie and Natalie, both reading leaders. We are going to introduce the staff we will be interviewing about Halloween and spooky books.
Hello, I'm Mrs Ross and I'm in the English department.
Hi, my name's Mrs Farquhar and I'm in the science department.
Hello, I'm Mrs Wignall and I'm in the maths department.
Hello, I'm Mrs Fraser, also in the maths department.
And I'm Mr Johnson, I'm the head teacher.
So we're going to start with our first question, and I'll go to Miss Wignall first. Do you think we should encourage young people to read scary books?
Absolutely. I think it's really important for kids to read all types and genres of books. I think if they read scary books, it gives them an opportunity to experience and understand fear, and fear is an emotion. So I think the more we are exposed to that, the more we can understand it and learn from it. I think that's great. And it also can be just a bit of fun, R.L. Stein, Goosebumps, things like that.
Mr Johnson, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. You only learn how to deal with things by experiencing them, and it's actually quite a safe place to learn how to deal with being scared by reading a book, rather than putting yourself into a physically scary position, and we'll all become scared. It's completely normal. We need to learn how to deal with it, and the worst thing is to suddenly have an emotion leap out at you when you're 27 and that's the first time you've had to deal with it. You need to build it up over the course of your growing up.
And Mrs Ross, what do you think?
Hello. Yes, I also agree with what's been said. It's pretty much everything I thought of, actually. The idea of it being a safe way to experience fear. I think that's really important. And just the idea that we can't control everything, and we need to sort of get used to that, and face the things that happen in our lives, because some things are scary.
And then I'll go to Miss Farquhar.
Well, I think reading of any genre is really important, and personally I would encourage my children to read lots, but I don't think I would encourage my children to read scary stories, because I've had bad experiences in the past, especially when they were little, so I would tend to encourage them to read other types of books, if I'm honest.
And finally, Mrs Fraser, what do you think?
I think all genres of books are important to read as well, and for a person who has not been a keen reader growing up, I found scary books in my teenage years, and I found them really gripping page turners, which encouraged me to read more into my adult life as well. So it was a good way to get me into reading, and it might encourage more people to do that too.
All right, we're going to move on to our second question, talking about scary books. Do any of you guys have your favourite scary book, Miss Farquhar?
I'm afraid to say I'm a little bit boring. I do not like scary stories. I remember picking up a Stephen King book once and just getting through the first few pages, and I thought, no, this is definitely not for me. I'm more into crime or romance novels, but sorry, definitely not scary stories.
Mrs Fraser, do you have anything to add?
I'm a complete opposite, and I absolutely loved Stephen King, and Dean Koontz was one of my favourites in my later teenage years as well. I don't think I could pick out a particular favourite though. I just liked the sort of dark characters and the excitement of gripping and find out what's going to happen when you turn the page.
Miss Ross?
I also echo the Stephen King vibe. I read The Shining when I was about 14 or 15, and it was the first book that I can happily say I was absolutely terrified by, but I absolutely couldn't put it down either. It was so gripping. Just the idea that a person can lose their mind, because of loneliness or the situation they're in or the environment, but also the fact that the hotel was the sort of ambiguity around the hotel being haunted as well. I just find it fascinating. Absolutely.
Miss Wignall?
So absolutely, I'm the same. I love every genre of book, but one of the first genres I really became hooked on was horror books. I grew up reading Goosebumps. I read them and read them and read them, especially the pick your own story ones. I had to have them. I love Stephen King. The first one I became completely fascinated, gripped, and horrified by was It, and then watched the film. And can I just say, I hate clowns now. but I still love horror stories. The most recent one I read was actually based in Scotland. It's called The Tasting Menu. It's more of an adult scary one, but some of you older S4, 5s and 6s might quite enjoy it. It's very gripping and a short story, but quite scary.
Finally.
Well, mine is one more from kind of your kind of age group, which I read when I was probably just at the change between primary and secondary, called The Weird Stone of Brisingamen by an author called Alan Garner, and there's one that follows up from it called The Moon of Gomrath, and it's that crossover between fantasy and reality and things that happen in the underworld. And I actually went to the real life underworld that it was based around and the caves that it was set in, and I was given it by one of my teachers at the end of primary, and I probably read it every 2 years again and ever since, because it just, the imagery in it is fantastic. I don't find it scary anymore, but I did then, and I think it would certainly come under the category of a scary book, and I think it's great to go back and relive your youth like that as well.
And now for the final question, Mrs. Ross, what is your biggest fear?
Well, I'm going to go with I came up with two. The first one's quite intense, so I'm going to start with the second one, which is small spaces. Fear of being stuck in a small space. Really not keen on that at all. But the first one, slightly more intense, is actually just people and our capacity for evil that within us, But I think I'll just leave it there. But yes, let's go with small spaces.
Now, Miss Wignall.
Right, so I have an interesting one, and one that, so I said I don't like clowns. I'm not particularly afraid of them. I think I find them weird. But my two fears, one is loose hair, which is actually just something I'm so grossed out by it becomes a fear. I don't like loose hair. It's a weird one. Don't ask me why. And my fear that we normally count as a fear is, funnily enough, heights. And the reason I say it's funny is because I'm also an adrenaline junkie, so I absolutely have to do adrenaline sports, including climbing and caving, of which have significant drops in them. I actually got engaged in a cave where there was a 40-meter drop below me, and I had to use friction and pressure just to keep me above the drop. I was terrified, but also loved that feeling, just like the feeling of reading a scary book. I loved that tension and the just adrenaline of it. So fears are a good thing sometimes.
Mrs. Fraser, what about you?
I don't think mine's as interesting. However, my one biggest fear is horses, which many people absolutely love and adore and would like to groom them and ride them. However, as a child, one of my friends was thrown off a horse, and it reared up and landed on her leg, and she had a hoof print imprinted as a bruise in her leg for a long, long time. And I think that's where the fear first came from. Then into my teaching career, I did a World Challenge trip, and we went to South Africa and Lesotho, and one of the day's expedition was 7 hours on horseback through the mountains. I didn't cope with that particularly well. There was a lot of deep breathing, counting to 10 and a few tears. At the end of the 7 hours, I can't say that I've overcome my overcome my fear, but I will never be getting on one again.
Mr. Johnson, what about you?
Mine is definitely heights. I absolutely hate heights, but particularly when I'm on the edge of something. So I don't actually mind being high up, and I don't mind flying. I've flown aircraft myself. I've gone gliding myself. When I'm strapped into something like that, it's absolutely fine. But stand me on the edge of a table and I start to feel myself being sucked over the edge, and the edge of a cliff or a tall building where there's a railing that's kind of like anything less than kind of waist height, I absolutely hate it. And I can feel my blood pressure going up. I can feel myself starting to sweat. I just hate it. So definitely heights for me.
And finally, Miss Farquhar, what's your biggest fear?
I'm a bit claustrophobic as well, to be honest, so small spaces. And I only discovered it after being away in a camper van on a family holiday, and I woke up in the middle of the night in a sheer panic and had to feel the space that was around me, and I nearly got everyone up, and I actually had to get out the camper van and just calm myself down and then get back in and just reassure myself I was okay. And another one is going into an MRI machine. That just puts the fear of death into me, and I just think, oh my gosh, I could never, I think I would have to be like given some medication to be able to go through with it. So yeah, small spaces for me.
Well, that is all the questions we have today. So thank you to all the staff for coming, and thank you to anyone listening. We hope to see people listening again in the future for our ones in November and December. So thank you.